Hey guys, we are back. We are continuing this devotional series on Instagram, but beginning a new series. And we will be looking at the book of Ezra Nehemiah, which is a book in the Old Testament. It's broken up into two different books in our English Bibles, but it is all a part of one actual book. Reason being is because Ezra Nehemiah is a seemingly obscure book. It is one that you may not be aware of and that you may have never read of or even heard of up to this point. And if that is you, then that's okay. This is your chance to begin going through it. I didn't get to this until quite a few years into my walk with the Lord, and so it's one that I think a lot of us have not been exposed to. At the same time, I want to go through it because it is a book that is filled with shattered expectations, that is filled with moments of hope and joy and rising up, and then something or stepping in or someone stepping in ultimately seems to shatter that hope and expectation, and things just don't go the way that they are expected to go quite a few times throughout this book. And so as we step into this, we're just going to go through it bit by bit. Today we're just going to look at chapter 1, and so please read all the chapters as we go along. I don't need to read the entire chapter out to you because some of these chapters are fairly long. I know chapter 2 is like 70 verses, and so I don't want to just sit here and read 70 verses. So read through it as we walk through this devotional. But today we'll be focusing solely on chapter 1. And seeing what the Lord has in store for us there. As we step into this, what's helpful is to know, what led us to being here. Ezra Nehemiah is actually the last book, technically chronologically, in the Old Testament. It is the last record of events that we have throughout the Old Testament. It is in this book that we see the Israelites going back to Jerusalem, back to the promised land that they once had but were exiled out of. They were given the promised land. They conquered and took the promised land, and all the way back in Joshua. They had made covenant promises to God that they would be faithful to him, and their condition in that promise was that if they were faithful to him, they would remain in the land. But if they failed to be faithful, they broke the covenant that they had made with God, that he actually would take them out of the land and that they would be conquered and exiled. And so they were not faithful. They were conquered and exiled by the kingdom of Babylon. And now this is flash forward about 70 years later. In the midst of that happening, the kingdom of Persia comes in, conquers Babylon, and now King Cyrus, as we see here in verse 1, is this Persian king who then steps in and actually gives this decree to send the people of God back to the promised land. And so this is something that is a big deal because it is something that was prophesied throughout the prophets. So the prophet Jeremiah, in places like Jeremiah 25, gives a prophecy that after 70 years, the Israelites would go back and return to Jerusalem. And so you see these promises that God has been given, that he has communicated through his prophets, that are being fulfilled right before our eyes. We see King Cyrus, who is issuing this decree for the people of Israel to go back home. We even see in verse starting in verse 9, we see there's a number of these items, these 30 basins of gold, 1,000 basins of silver, 29 censers, 30 bowls of gold, all these seemingly random things, but things actually that belonged to the Israelites prior to their exile. And so this is God demonstrating his covenant faithfulness to his people. He is keeping his promises to them. He told them that he's going to bring them back to the land, and this is exactly what he is doing. He is faithful to his people, and he is demonstrating faithfulness. And what's so amazing and what strikes me so much about this passage, and so strikes me so much and has struck me so much throughout this season that we have found ourselves in, is that God often uses evil and terrible things to accomplish his good purposes. Well, what do I mean by that? I mean, he uses people like King Cyrus, who are outside of his covenant people, who don't belong to him, but he even uses somebody who like King Cyrus, to fulfill his very purposes, to deliver his people from exile and to bring them back home. God uses terrible events and works good out of those things. He uses the terrible things that happen to us in our lives and uses that actually for his good, or for our good, and for his glory. And that's what we're going to see throughout Ezra and Nehemiah over and over and over and over again. We're going to see these moments of great hope, of great expectation, and then something happens that seems to dash those hopes. Or something that happens that maybe it kind of seemed to come to fruition, but also really didn't come to fruition. And I think that we find ourselves in a season where that's happened quite a lot over the last year or so. Of a lot of different things that we were hopeful for, looking forward to, maybe really close to getting, and yet something steps in the way and something happens that keeps that from occurring. You may be feeling that now. Maybe you were doing or in-person school and you were so excited to be back in person, and then a number of cases popped up and too many cases popped up, and now you're back doing stuff online. This is the story of Ezra and Nehemiah, the story of shattered expectations, the story of things not working out the way that we want them to work. But as we go through the stories, we see that throughout the people of Israel in this context. We see God continuing to demonstrate his faithfulness, his covenant promises, and keeping his word to the fullest, even when it doesn't look like that's what he's doing. And so join us in this series. Go through Ezra and Nehemiah. If you can't find it, it's a few books before the Psalms. And please dig into this book with us together as we go through Ezra and Nehemiah, as we look at what God has in store for us through this seemingly obscure and insignificant book, but one that actually is remarkably significant and very relevant for us as Christians today. Please join us, dig into the Word with us, and see what God has in store for us in Ezra and Nehemiah. Thanks, guys.